Well, it's a hit politically. If you're talking about a long-term economic reform, it's a miss. So politically, they couldn't have done better, and that's become a hallmark of Scott Morrison. You know, there's something for everyone. It's also a bit of a miss in terms of all the assumptions in it.
So what is it like a straight bat? He played a straight bat, politically safe?
Oh, he played a few shots as well, but yeah, definitely politically so safe. You know, almost like there'll be an election in 12 months. Dare I say?
Yeah, I mean, but he's pragmatic though. This is his style, like you're saying. So that doesn't surprise many people.
No, it doesn't. But I think you look at the fact that Josh Frydenberg in May told the press club that he wanted to see company tax cuts, and then in a subsequent address at the press club, he talked about supply side reform and Reagan Thatcher, and then you start to think, well, has Scott Morrison, and maybe even Matthias Cormann, but certainly Scott Morrison influenced this outcome? Like, does Josh Frydenberg have more of a mind to reform, but Scott's more in the pragmatic camp? And that's kind of how I read it. I think, you know, a few interesting things. The vaccine, obviously, we broke that, and it's kind of like, that's pretty brave assumption. Dennis Shanahan, the political editor of The Australian, said that would be the bravest assumption he'd ever seen in budgets if it happened. It has happened. So those deficits, they really want to create this picture we have smaller deficits out the back, but that's largely based on the vaccine, on being able to open the international borders, which the budget really highlights as such a key thing.
2022.
Yeah, so, I mean...
And what about migration, population too? I mean, that was interesting. That was an interesting stat, down 1 million.
It's devastating. It's a real problem. I mean, you know, some of the... ironic, really, when a couple of years ago, I think Peter Dutton was trying to get the ceiling pulled down. That occurred. Tony Abbott was calling for it to be cut to 120 a year. Now we've got negative 72,000 a year. I mean, it's from the sublime, the ridiculous.
That's a lot of people not spending.
It totally. And look, the funny thing is that benefits state governments because they have to do less on infrastructure. The other thing, the miss on it, I wanted to see a lot more money into infrastructure. I think that's really important. If you're going to throw all this money out the door, I know you have to get people to spend it quick and to keep the economic activity going. But to me, then at least you have an asset at the end if you do that for the community. This way, you know, we all get money, we all spend it, you know, much of an asset, you know. So that to me is, Albanese's a former infrastructure minister. I'll bet anything in his budget reply, that's what he'll be pushing for.
Childcare as well, I would have thought too.
Yeah, free childcare. I mean, that's the other popular type thing you can do. But I just feel like Morrison is so good politically at snookering Labor. He really does take the centre ground. He really does take all the populist kind of policy as if to say, well, what are you going to do, mate, to Albanese? You know, because, you know, you can spend more, you look irresponsible. We're spending enough. It's a step down from JobKeeper. It's 100 billion to 40 billion with JobMaker next year. So there's no doubt there's a step down, but the stimulus is still there.
And is that why it's all been kind of thrown in this one basket, the omnibus bill? So it's either take it or leave it. And so Labor's completely wedged on that.
But who's... I mean, look, I didn't see Albanese on with you, Willie, but what are they really going to oppose, you know?
Yeah.
Because if you put the stage 3 tax cuts in there, I think for a brief moment it's been reported they thought about that. That's a real dilemma for Labor. That's the traditional wedge. I think Morrison's decided not to do that. He thinks perhaps it's just too important for the economy to get this thing through, to not go the typical political game. But the interesting question now is what happens next May with the budget. I do think that stepping down from the 101 billion to 40 billion means perhaps they've kept their powder a bit dry. If the economy doesn't improve, if the measures aren't enough, if unemployment starts to rise, they'll have another whack at big spending again in May.
So jumping up to 4.75% next year, I mean, is that ambitious? I mean, Chris Richardson seemed to think that might be on track with his forecasts. Are you that hopeful?
Well, I think the forecasts are optimistic, and particularly because of the vaccine. So 21-22, the jump up, they're saying halfway through you'll have a population-wide vaccine. So
and just on that, because we've spoken that a few times on our show, vaccine, the government seemed fairly confident that it would be at the start of next year. So have they walked that back? Have they kind of tried to temper expectations a little bit by suggesting it'll be the end of next year now?
They would say they're being conservative, and they say there's a built in there 34 billion extra if they get it 6 months earlier, which is when they originally said. But I might point out, Peter, there's no vaccine scenario in the budget. They've got an earlier vaccine or a vaccine. No vaccine scenario. I think they should have that.
Okay, so just finally, just looking to tomorrow night, what's the play, in your opinion, from Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers?
Well, I think he has to go infrastructure. I think he has to point towards being someone who's prepared to reform or change something. Otherwise, why would you vote for him? You may as well stick with this guy. He's competent enough. And that's the test for Albanese, and people in Labor know it's the test. It's a big night for Anthony Albanese, maybe the biggest of his leadership so far.
Okay.